This Facebook Live. So without further ado, good evening, TRED members, partners, and friends. I am Jessica Karlsruher, the Executive Director of the Texas Real Estate Advocacy and Defense Coalition, otherwise known as TRED. And for those of you tuning in to TRED for the first time, we are a bipartisan, member-based advocacy organization that advocates for and defends private property rights and landowners. I'm proud to welcome you to this evening's forum. We have candidates for Senate District 14 that encompasses Austin proper, parts of Leander, Pflugerville, Manor, Elgin, part of Lakeway, I believe, and Bastrop. And there is a special election. Senator Kirk Watson has retired from the seat, and the special election will be held on July 14th. Here with us tonight, we have Libertarian Pat Dixon, Democratic candidates Judge Sarah Eckhart and Eddie Rodriguez. We have Independent Jeff Ridgway and the Republican candidate Don Zimmerman. So welcome you all. Thank you for being here with us tonight. And our moderator for this evening is Scott Braddock, who is a journalist, political analyst, and editor of the Quorum Report, which is a nonpartisan newsletter focused on Texas politics and government. Scott will ask a series of questions for each candidate to answer, and time permitting, we will open up the forum to the attendees to submit questions. You can submit questions through the Q&A box that if you hover over the bottom of the screen, you'll see Q&A. So you can type your question in there, and then Scott can get to as many as we possibly can with the time. We're hoping that we'll be around an hour and a half, give or take, so you all have an opportunity to speak. At the end, there will be time for each of you to state your platform and why you're running for Senate. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Scott. Thank you so much for serving as our moderator this evening.
Absolutely, and thank you for hosting me, Jessica. I appreciate you. And for all the candidates who are able to attend via Zoom, I appreciate you as well. There are 5 of you. 6 in the race, but 1 couldn't attend, as Jessica mentioned earlier. So with 5 of you here, it should be either very well structured or a complete disaster, a complete mess. We'll see how it goes over the next hour and a half. Yeah, please do submit your questions in the Q&A box if you'd like to ask something. I have some questions here that have been pre-thought out by the group. Of course, the group very interested, the coalition interested in land rights and those sorts of issues. So we'll get to all of that. But I do want to start with the fact that we're on Zoom, right? And we've been on Zoom meetings for months. Why are we doing that? Because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Who would have foreseen, even going back to January and February, that this is where we would be now? One of my good friends in Texas politics, one of the sharpest observers, says there's no way to know how the November election will go because think of this question. What do we know about the pandemic in October that we don't know today? Who knows, right? Things are in flux. And so I'm going to go randomly to each of you with this first question. Tell me your thoughts on the pandemic, the state's response. The governor has taken on basically on himself, and he's asserted that county judges and mayors don't have even a right to on him. Lately, it hasn't been going that great for the governor, and even the Republican Party has been in sort of a revolt about some of his actions. So, Mr. Zimmerman, you're one of the Republicans in the race. Let me start with you on that. What do you think?
Well, I appreciate that, but let me say first, Mr. Braddock, your video and audio is cutting in and out. I'm probably getting about 80% of what you're saying, but 80% is not bad considering, modern bandwidth problems. But as far as the pandemic goes, I think my main objection to what the government has been doing is trying to sell us on a presumption that the government can save us from a pandemic or a virus. I have to remind our voters and our citizens that care about civil rights that we've had pandemics for thousands of years. And what seems to be new today is the belief that the government can save us from a pandemic, provided that we surrender unlimited power to the government to control us in terms of mask, putting an infrared thermometer at our forehead, or shutting down bars, and making all these various executive orders that seem rather chaotic. And they're very disruptive and destructive to especially small business. So I want to start my comment by saying that I don't believe that people should accept the premise that the government should be allowed unlimited power in order to save us from a pandemic, because it cannot save us from the pandemic.
All right, and I understand some others are having a little trouble hearing me as well. I'm going to talk slower. Maybe that will help. We'll see. I'm not a technician. We'll see how this goes. I appreciate y'all powering through it with me. Mr. Ridgway, let me go to you with the same question. What do you make of what the government in Texas has done in response to COVID-19?
Well, I think this is probably, for all of us, we recognize that this is probably going to completely dominate the legislature during the next session. The virus itself, our response to it, and particularly the economic consequences of it are going to be long lasting. I agree with Don on some levels that I don't think government can necessarily answer this for us. The government can make some recommendations and put in place some public health measures, but this virus has shown itself to be not very amenable to some of those public health measures. And we're, in particular now, the current surge in cases that we're seeing is going on even in light of some of the public health measures that have been in place for a long time. I hate to say it, but at this point, we really just need to focus this virus, we're going to see a dramatic increase in cases. I'm a physician. Epidemics go through a sort of bell-shaped curve, and we're in the upward slope of that curve now. What we need to focus on is making sure that our hospitals and our healthcare workers have the resources to take care of our sick patients and make sure that they get through this virus. To some extent, you have to have that increase in cases before you can develop some degree of immunity, and before you can actually get any degree of herd immunity and any decrease in spread. The big question is just how many cases are we going to overwhelm our healthcare system? And so that's why at this point, we really need to be focusing on shoring up our healthcare system, making sure that we have the resources we need to take care of the people that we need, and riding this thing out. I don't know that we can count on a vaccine for this. Mm-hmm. Coronaviruses, that family of viruses, is very resistant to developing vaccines. That's one of the reasons we still have the common cold.
Right.
And so it's hard to say whether COVID-19 will be we'll be able to develop an effective vaccine against it, but I don't think we can count on that to any certain degree.
Appreciate that. And again, with the technical difficulties, we power through them. Let's go over to one of the Democrats. Let's go to Judge Eckhart. And by the way, I would say Ms. Eckhart or Judge Eckhart. I think whenever somebody was in office, to their face, you refer to them as the last highest office they was in. That they were in. That's just courtesy. I know someone's going to ask me why I was calling you Judge Eckhart. That's why I'm saying that. Anyway, Judge Eckhart, what do you make of where we are? Our response from the state? What do you make of the governor's response to this, and how you'd address it in the legislature?
Well, I agree with Dr. Ridgway. This is a bell curve that we're on, and we are definitely on the upward slope of the bell curve. Just yesterday, we had the highest number of recorded positives of this season. And so what we are in the act of trying to do, because the genius of human beings is our adaptability. So what we're trying to do is adapt our personal behavior, our business behaviors, and our governmental behaviors in order to make the bell curve flatter, so that we don't overrun our capacity to treat people in appropriate settings. So that we absolutely can do, and that is our genius collectively, is our ability to adapt. So I don't think our way forward is to hide in our homes. But I do think our way forward is to have honest, data-driven conversations about who is most at risk, and also what behaviors make us most at risk, and how we can adapt personally in our business settings and also in our governmental practices. I think we're in the act of doing that. I think that local leaders have been particularly decisive at picking up effective adaptations from across the globe. The state has been slow to those adaptations and resistant to those adaptations. even to the point of, in some instances, gaslighting local elected officials, saying, why aren't you doing more when the governor previously said you're not allowed to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we are struggling with that. But I think that really it's an all hands on deck moment, and I would prefer not to politicize this. I think really we all just need to come together and do whatever is effective, efficient, and fair to flatten out that curve to the greatest extent possible and manage our risks.
Mr. Dixon, give us the Libertarian candidate's perspective on all this. In fact, I think I heard Judge Eckhart say something that you might agree with, which is we can't just wait this out in our homes. Where would you differ, and what would
well,
you about the state's response?
So first, I don't think I have time to say everything I want to say, so let me just give you my website, which is logic14.org, LOGIC, the number 14.org. If you go to that site, there's a questions page, and look for COVID-19. I have a lot of points I made on this issue, but let me just summarize two of them.
Okay.
So the first thing, I am not going to tell you I'm the expert. My campaign is not about me knowing all the answers. I think what a legislator should do, based on my experience serving in elected office, working with other people, is listening. Start with listening, not talking. And the first people I want to listen to are people like Dr. Ridgway. I'd say, Jeff, give me some advice. What do you think is the best thing? So we have 50 states doing their experiments. We have nations all over the world doing their experiments. That's where I'm going to make my decisions on how we go forward. Look at those results. The second thing I want to say is Chapter 14 of the state code deals with emergency powers for the executive.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue there is, what are the constitutional limitations there? You have businesses that have been ordered closed and say to open up and now closed again. So as a libertarian, I am always concerned about how much power you're giving to one person. And I would want to ask those questions to make sure we know under what conditions somebody can order things to be closed.
All right. And Representative Rodriguez, I would give you the last word on this question. What do you make of where we are in the state with COVID-19, the state's response, and what the legislature ought to be doing?
Yeah, well, now is not the time for the blame game, and I don't want to do that to Governor Abbott or anything like that. But I just will say, hindsight is 2020. There was no way that Governor Abbott or anybody on this panel could have known what to do exactly right, because we hadn't experienced this before. But obviously, the state needed to provide more clear guidance, and if it was going to be up to the locals, then I think the state needed to allow the local governments to do what they felt was best for their communities based on the health professionals on the ground. And there seemed to have been a little bit of flip-flopping there, and that's unfortunate. But I think we're in a situation now where we are spiking, or on the verge of spiking, across the state of Texas, and we do. I have to disagree a little bit with my Republican friend Don Zimmerman that there is a place for government here. Obviously, the government's role, part of our role, is to provide for public health and to try to make people as safe as possible. So obviously, we do have a role. But I think maybe just as importantly, we have a responsibility as citizens also to be careful and to be safe and to wear the mask, because it's not just about your individual liberty to wear or not wear. It's really about the public health. It's about getting my family sick potentially. So it's a matter of just being a good Texan and doing the right thing. But I do think that. I'll give the governor some credit on what he's doing now. I think he's allowing our locals to do more, what they need to do, and hopefully we'll just get through this as a state. Get through this crisis, and hopefully our fellow citizens will do the right thing and wear the mask, or stay at home if they can. If they have to go to work, be responsible.
Let me ask y'all about moving forward. Those are very interesting responses on our, where we're at. But moving forward, state government is going to see probably a huge budget shortfall. We are supposed to get this month a new revenue estimate from the comptroller, who has said on the record that that revenue estimate is going to be revised down to the tune of billions of dollars. If you look at the turnover in the Texas House, for example, we probably have about 100 legislators there who have never gone through a serious budget cutting session like we did back in 2011. That was the last time we had a big one like that, a really stressful one like that. Maybe in for it again, looking at the state budget, looking at what needs to be done from various programs in state government for people who are going through this crisis. You've got people, I think as some of you probably mentioned, and I've been thinking about a lot over the last couple of months, there are people who have never asked for assistance before who are waiting at the food bank throughout this pandemic. It's very difficult for a lot of people, and the state government in a lot of ways needs to step up, and local communities have done that. The state has done that to an extent. But moving forward, tell me about your philosophy, if you're working within that body under Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. The Republicans in this field may have different thoughts on that from the Democrats in the field. I would start with Judge Eckhart on this one. What do you think?
The COVID-19 has certainly amplified the problem, but the problem existed before COVID-19, that the state of Texas hasn't, for a very long time now, taken a good hard look at its revenue sources to ensure that we had sustainable ongoing revenue sources to attend to the responsibilities of state government under the Texas Constitution. That would include public health across the state. I believe a third of the counties in the state of Texas have no public health department. And an overlapping third have no hospital. So we do have a lot of repair that needed to happen before COVID-19 ever hit. And now we're seeing a precipitous drop off in state revenues because we are over-reliant on revenue sources that actually decline right when you need government leaning in to carry people to the other shore of an economic crisis like this. So what I would recommend is that we take a look at our sales tax and include professional services taxes. We don't have an income tax, so that's probably the closest that we can get to that. I think we need to take a look at our excise tax, our oil and gas tax, and consider what that looks like into the future as our economy shifts under climate change. I don't think that that is a sustainable ongoing source in the long haul. So we need to be taking a look at energy taxation in a broader sense. I think that we also need to take a look at converting our local option homestead exemption. And oftentimes the state legislature ignores property taxes and just blames locals for property taxes, when actually at the state level, that's where property tax policy is essentially generated. So we need to review our homestead exemption to make it a flat rate rather than a percentage. That would bring in more revenue and also be fairer to those who are on at the lower income scale. We need to take a look at our alcohol taxes, tobacco taxes, and other consumption taxes. I would strongly suggest that after being a prosecutor for a number of years, alcohol and marijuana, I see no difference between the two. It should just be a controlled substance, just like alcohol, and we should tax it appropriately. Additionally, we should phase out ineffective tax breaks. Tax breaks, you can use the tax code very productively, but only if you're continually refreshing it. Tax breaks should not live forever. And we do have some sunsets coming up, and it's going to be very important to take a look at those sunsets with new eyes. And also, I think we need to, as actually Representative Rodriguez has championed, the demilitarization and the defederalization of our local law enforcement, but also our state law enforcement. But we don't need to be doing border security on behalf of the federal government.
But and to the tune of $800 million per biennium, right? It's a lot of money that's going to DPS, and there have been questions about that and how much accountability there is for how much they're spending. And by the way, Republicans and Democrats have asked that question about exactly how they're spending all that. Let's see if there's any contrast to the Democrats in the race here. Representative Rodriguez, what do you think going forward for budget implications, et cetera, trying to govern during this pandemic?
Well, I mean, it really is a matter of priorities. For me, if I'm the senator of SD 14, it's what my priorities are going to be, and public education and public and healthcare are the two top priorities for me. So we want to try to prioritize those. If you mentioned 2011, in 2011 we did have, and there's still a lot of unknowns, by the way. In 2011 we had some money come in from the federal government. We don't know if that will happen this time. Everybody just froze. Could you all hear me?
Yes,
Anyway.
yeah, it's just dragged out a little bit. It's okay.
Gotcha. I'll check.
We really got the point.
I will try to talk slowly too.
I was trying it as well.
So I think, not knowing what's going to happen in November, we very well may have a new president. We may have a democratically controlled U.S. Senate, and that could mean a lot of different things for the various states in terms of federal money that could come down. But that's an unknown. There are some things, Scott, as you probably know, that accounting tricks, for lack of a better way of saying it, we can postpone payments to various things. Looking at the permanent school fund, if we postpone payments to the permanent school fund for a couple of weeks, it saves us about $2 billion. You can, again, as Sarah mentioned, something I've been talking about, and the Mexican American Legislative Caucus has been really talking about loudly, is saving that $800 million on border security. That's the federal government's job, not our job. And I think you can also look at some other things. I'm hearing some bipartisan support of really revisiting charter schools in terms of how they're funded. Charter schools get on average over $1,000 more a child per day, weighted average. And so we got to get that in line with public schools, and that could save us about $1 billion there. We have $8.5 billion in the rainy day fund. It would be, I think, probably fiscally irresponsible to spend all of that down, but if we need to look at spending some of that down, it means making fewer cuts on healthcare and public education. So, I mean, that's kind of, I think, where we're at. There's, again, a little bit of unknown out there, but the 2011 budget was a very tough one. And it took us a very long time to dig ourselves out of that hole. And now is a time where we have to be investing in public education and healthcare more than ever, honestly. And I don't think that now is the time to be cutting so deeply there. As far as new revenue sources, obviously I would be opposed to raising the sales tax. And generally speaking, if there's certain things that we can look at to add to the sales tax, as Sarah mentioned, perhaps some services there, and there are some other taxes that people can avoid, that companies or individuals can avoid, that we might need to look at as well, in closing some loopholes.
Representative, thank you. And Dr. Ridgway, I'm sorry, I should have been calling you doctor previously. What do you make of well, it is a problem. What's the difference between God and a doctor? Do you know this one? God knows he's not a doctor, right? Okay, so Dr. Ridgway,
I missed about 50% of
the joke wasn't coming through. Don't worry about it. Other people can be offended on your behalf. So where do you make of the path forward? What do you make of the path forward for state government, looking at new revenue sources, thinking about how to govern moving forward during this pandemic?
Well, I think it's going to be very hard to predict where we're going to be by the time the legislature rolls around. As you mentioned earlier, we're literally only halfway through this year. It seems like it's been a decade, but we're only halfway through this year. And so I don't think any of us can reliably predict where our country or our state will be economically by the time we get through this and by the time we get to the end of the year and the beginning of the legislature. That being said, I do think that there's a lot of things we can anticipate trying to do in order to help the budget next year. I think, a couple, Judge Eckhart and Representative Rodriguez have both mentioned cutting the funding that we provide for border security, and I would agree on that. I think there are some cuts that could be made there. I would strongly disagree with Representative Rodriguez about charter schools. I'm a very big advocate of school choice. I feel that school choice is really, we need to look at getting not just through this pandemic and through this economic rough time. We need to look at developing Texas going forward for years in the future. And the way that we do that is through education. Charter schools are a form of public schools. There are a lot of students who go there who, as an alternative to the public school system, and how they educate our students well, and they help build up our workforce for the future. So I would not have that on the table if I could help it in terms of any future budget negotiations.
Doctor, thank you. Mr. Dixon, what do you think about, governing in the pandemic, moving forward, new revenue sources, reworking the state budget and the way it works, different programs, things you might cut, things you might add? Thoughts on all that?
Oh yeah, I have thoughts.
Okay.
I don't know if I'll fit them all in, but again, go to my website. But
sure, do your best.
So the two things I think I want to focus on first, my friend Sarah Eckhart made some good points about decriminalization and demilitarization. Let me try that again. Demilitarization of police. And the Libertarian Party has been there since we were founded. So I think Sarah and I are on the same page there. But really, when you think about the budget, I think there are ways to do budgeting that are the right way and the wrong way. I've been through this on city council. When I first got on city council, Lago Vista had too small of a reserve. At one time, we had the highest property tax rate in the state of Texas. We were able to reduce that rate, establish the reserve, and get our finances in much better shape. So I have experience doing that at city council, in nonprofits, in business. This is a bigger challenge, obviously. But the wrong way to do budgeting when things get tight is to say across the board cuts. I don't think that is the way you do budgeting. What you do is identify the functions and figure out what functions you need and what you don't need. I'll give you an example. The agriculture department in the state of Texas has 130 statutory requirements, statutory duties. Including one of them is to go around the state of Texas and inspect the scales at barbecue restaurants. Yeah. So that's one example, but that's the way you do budgeting. You look at functions and ask, should the state of Texas be doing that? So that's my approach. But if you want more, go to my website, logic14.org.
All right, thank you very much. And Don Zimmerman, since you got to go first on the last question, I'll let you have the last word on this question.
Terrific, Scott.
It's about budgeting, moving forward in a budget crisis, a pandemic in Texas.
Sure. First thing I want to say is the worst thing that could possibly be done is to not cut government spending. And I want to say, going back to your point of why I wanted to be elected to the Texas Senate, one of my priorities is tackling government greed. And let me explain what I mean by government greed. Right now, I'm looking at traviscountytx.gov/FY20 impact statement. So this is the bureaucracy of the local Travis County government planning how they're going to take more of our money. They are proposing an 8% tax increase that is above, of course, the 3.5% cap that we fiscal conservatives pushed through in the last session. But the county is also taking advantage of rising appraisals. So your effective tax rate, they are proposing to raise 11%. And that really is galling to property taxpayers and businesses who have been shut down by Judge Eckhart and others' orders, shutting down businesses and robbing us of our ability to work and earn money and pay our bills. And on top of shutting us down, now the greedy government wants to come and jack up our property taxes or the taxes we pay to the city by 11%. This is the problem with government, okay? When there's an economic crisis, the greedy government demands that it be fed and have huge tax increases, even against the law as it's been passed to limit those increases. And then our businesses and taxpayers have suffered huge losses, and they have to cut their own budgets and figure out a way to survive. But the government thinks, no, we're not going to cut our budget. We're going to increase our budget by 11%. Something is wrong with this picture, and I would argue that this is the problem, especially with local government, but it's some of the problem in state government too. They see themselves as rulers and masters over the people. So when the people are suffering economically and don't have the money to pay, what the government does is they jack up taxes. And I think people should be angry and offended at that.
Mr. Zimmerman, I appreciate the segue into the next question I was going to ask, which is about property taxes. And Judge Eckhart, you were invoked there as the former judge in Travis County and having made decisions. And what Mr. Zimmerman was talking about quite a bit was local government. And, you know, we have all heard the anger from local taxpayers all across the state, you know, whether it's in Houston, Dallas, Travis County, Bexar County, wherever, about property taxes. And I think the pain with property taxes is uneven depending on where you are in the state. I think people in Lubbock are paying, you know, one thing, people in Austin are paying something else. But you know, the tax caps were passed into law, and here we are a year after that, and we're still arguing about property taxes being too high, right? So you know, there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame game going on. But what's the actual solution? And of course, I'm going to ask everybody about their thoughts on property taxes overall here going forward. But Judge Eckhart, your thoughts, and maybe on some of what Mr. Zimmerman said as well.
Sure. We are heavily over-reliant, frankly, on property taxes and local property taxes specifically. The reason for that is that state government, as I said before, has not identified sustainable ongoing appropriate revenues to pay for things like public education, things like public health, things like transportation. Rather than make the hard decisions at the state level, they shirk their responsibilities and push it off onto the locals. We know well the statistics with regard to public education and how property taxes are driven predominantly by your school district because the state contributes less and less of a percentage toward the cost of educating our children. And that is what's driving our property taxes. I will say that in my time as county judge in fiscal years 15, 16, and 17, the average tax burden on the average homeowner was actually lower than it was in fiscal year 14. Even Senator Betancourt praised Travis County for our fiscal conservatism. Because we had kept our tax increases between 3% and 4% for almost a decade. That's because things were going quite well economically in Travis County. So we wanted to keep a majority of your tax dollars in your pocket rather than in ours. And so that is an example of how property taxes are supposed to work. In good times, you leave the money in the hands of the constituency so that they can use it and generate commerce and build tax base, as former Councilman Zimmerman said. And it is true that we've gone to 8% in a global pandemic that is also ushering in an economic downturn. Government spending is counter-cyclical. You want to spend more in an economic downturn in order to ferry people to the other side of that economic downturn instead of being decimated and having to build back from zero. I would suggest, as I already have mentioned here, that we look at property tax exemptions like the homestead exemption and make it a flat rate. That would be fair. I think that we should join the rest of the majority of the other states in the United States with sales price disclosure so that the burden of property tax is distributed fairly. Property tax can only be fair when it's accurate and the burden is distributed fairly, and sales price disclosure is needed for that. And then I would also require the state to identify ongoing revenue sources for public education and work their way back up to a 60% contribution for the cost of educating our young. It is a state mandate under the Texas Constitution. Certainly locals should have skin in the game. I'm not saying that it should all be on the state, but it certainly shouldn't all be on local property taxes.
Dr. Ridgway, when you look at the different, and again, I'm talking slower, hopefully the words get through for everyone. When you look at the different kind of revenue streams that could be out there, whether it's increased sales taxes that was floated in the last legislative session, taxes on, possibly legalizing marijuana, casino gambling, any of these other things. The truth is, the most reliable and steadiest source of income for government is taxes on real property. This is why we argue about this all the time, right? What are your thoughts on property taxes in general, and then specifically what you think ought to be done from the state government standpoint to try to provide some relief, but also provide the revenue that's needed for the various services like public education?
Well, I'm going to agree with some of what Don said earlier about government spending in general, and which will put me disagreeing with Judge Eckhart quite a bit here. I don't think that during an economic downturn is a time to spend more on government. In an economic downturn is exactly the time you want to leave more money in our citizens' pockets so that they can spend it, they can use it to get their businesses through this time, that they can get their families through this time, and not have to rely on the government to provide for them during this time. With regards to property taxes, as all of us who, I don't think you'd find anyone in Austin who says the property tax is too low. In general, I'd like to see it decreased. I think there are some ways that we could look at funding our schools a little better. The last legislature went a long way towards reforming the recapture laws. Prior to that, we had other school districts around the state that were quite literally swimming in money from Austin in order to fund their school districts. And I think there's still more room there to go to decrease the property taxes in the area. A decrease in property taxes in Austin will help bring in more citizens and more business. And I know all of us think maybe that translates into more traffic and everything, but it also translates into more economic activity. It translates into more patients in my office and that kind of thing. It translates into, more people walking into our restaurants and attending our events and that sort of thing. And that's what we need to help get this city back on its feet after the economic downturn we're experiencing.
Mr. Zimmerman, you kind of got us into talking about property taxes with your answer to the last question. So if it sounds to people like you're getting to talk more about this issue than the other candidates, that was a stealthy maneuver on your part, sir. But I'm gonna get you on this question here. You talked a lot about local governments raising taxes. You called it greed. But specifically, what would you do at the state level to try to rein that in? There were proposals that were passed last legislative session, and I think if you go around and ask people all around the state now, and in this Senate district in SD 14, you wouldn't hear from a lot of them that the state had a lot of success in containing their property taxes. What do you think?
Well, I think the problem again is spending. The monopoly government school districts, who are the biggest offenders in property taxes, as the judge pointed out. I always argue that trying to satisfy the monopoly government school districts with more revenue is like trying to satisfy a big wildfire by feeding it more trees. The more money you provide to the government school, the more it consumes and the more it demands. It never says enough. And in that fashion, it's very, very similar to the destruction of a wildfire. It never stops consuming unless someone forces it to stop or robs it of its fuel to keep growing. So I agree with Dr. Ridgway. The way to tackle the out of control spending in the monopoly government schools, which is driving the unaffordable taxes, is through some kind of methods of school choice where the taxpayers' dollars follow the professional teacher and the students that are being taught. I need to say quickly, both of my maternal grandparents were teachers. Between them, they taught for over 70 years. In fact, my grandparents both graduated from San Marcos Teachers College, as it was known back then in the 1920s. My grandfather was acquainted with a classmate by the name of Lyndon Baines Johnson, and that helps explain why he was a lifelong Republican. But I digress. The point here is we are spending way too much and getting way too little when it comes to education. And we've got to figure out a way that we can have money follow the professional teacher and follow the students, and we could have dramatic decreases in the cost of education and simultaneously have dramatic increases in the quality and the outcome of those education. My grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse as a student teacher back in the 1920s. She ran the school by herself, and she did an excellent job. And the lion's share of the money that was being spent on the school went to the teacher. Imagine what would happen if 90% of the money that we were spending per pupil would go to the teacher instead of to the bureaucracy. I mean, it is a bad joke, the outrageous bureaucracy and the waste of money that's going on in these big school districts. So in the limited time we have, that's really where I would focus my energies to get these out of control property taxes back under
And
control.
I think I might hear a little bit different answer from one of the other Democrats in the race. Representative Rodriguez, over to you, and what you think about reining in property taxes, dealing with what homeowners, property owners are dealing with, but at the same time, adequately funding our schools and,
Yeah, well,
and providing for other services as well. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Right, exactly. I think the state, and when it comes to public education, the largest part of your tax bill is your school district tax. It's by far, it's 60% plus probably. And so I think the state does need to pay in more. I think we hit the high water mark, I believe, in the mid 80s, where we were, the state was paying in at the high to mid to high 50%. And I do think we need to get back there, or maybe even more, and that'll save on property taxes. One of the things, before I get into this, other stuff, what we never talk about when we talk about property taxes is renters. Austin is, for example, Austin is roughly 60% renters, and I'm one of them. I don't own my home. I rent. So renters, if you're talking about property taxes, and people that do not see any relief, if there is property tax relief, are the renters all over the state of Texas. So I think that's something that we can discuss another time, perhaps, when we can figure that out. And the main issue, obviously, is that there's no correlation between the value of your property, or as it is appraised by the appraisal district, and your ability to pay it. And there's zero correlation there, and that's part of the problem. But there is room for some reform there. I think that we have to have a system that works, that operates as fairly as possible for all property owners. Again, we're not talking about renters, but operate more efficiently at all levels of government. I think technology, as we've seen, despite some of the glitches that we've had this evening, we're going to be doing a lot of things more. We obviously see the need for more technology, and maybe that with technology we can have more efficiencies at all levels of government, not just with appraisals, but all levels of government. I would look at legislation that would encourage more informal resolution to tax contest, and less of the formal hearings for contesting your taxes. I think that'll save some, on efficiency wise, that would save a lot there. But at the end of the day, I really think it's the state's responsibility to really invest on what we're supposed to be investing in, which is public education and healthcare. And when we do that, I think we can, if we pay the lion's share of public education, certainly, because that is constitutionally our obligation, that I think we would see appraisals go down potentially. Now the market's going to be what the market's going to be. That's the rub, right?
Right. Well, and it's nobody would tell you that they want their real value to go down in value, right? You want an asset to appreciate, right? And so because it's linked, it's just this conundrum for folks. I'm going to make a bold prediction.
Perfect timing.
You're going to mention your website, but I do want to know what you think. Property taxes, how to tackle this. There are so many competing ideas. We've had proposals that have been passed into law, some that haven't passed into law, and then there's probably ideas we have not even heard of. Where are you at on this issue?
Okay, so first, you can probably see my sign, and it says libertarian. So I don't think there's any secret about where we stand on taxation. So if high taxation is your concern, libertarian is the logical choice, just like it says on my sign. But specifically, you were asking about property taxes. And I think Dawn made a good point there that I want to focus on, the connection between taxation and spending, which doesn't seem to be connected at the federal level, where you spend and you grow debt and you print money or something. But at the local level, where I was on city council, where we actually reduced ad valorem rates, and it wasn't me alone, we worked together to do that. What you're doing is you're trying to get control of the situation. And at the local level, you have ad valorem municipal, you have emergency services and other things. But as everyone said, the big hit is the school district. And since the state is involved with that, with Robin Hood, that's where the state has a big role. And I'm aware of Senate Bill 2 that has some adjustments based on, should the rate change when appraisals rate. I know that's out there, but I want to give you an example of what I was talking about with budgeting before. If we say taxation needs to be connected with spending, the way I look at spending is you focus on your core functions and make sure they're fully funded. I'll give you an example. Obviously, right now, the police are a big issue. It's everybody's talking about it. When I was first put on city council, one of the first things I did is persuade the city to increase compensation to retain experienced officers. Because if you know anything about Lago Vista, you know about a Supreme Court case in which a woman was put in jail for a seatbelt violation. Retaining experienced officers, that's the proper investment to make sure government's doing the right thing. So in the budget process, you're looking at the things you shouldn't be doing, and that should feed into taxation.
All right, I appreciate that. We do have some folks submitting questions. If you want to submit a question, if you're one of the folks who's watching us, you click on the Q&A box that at the bottom of your screen, and you can put a question. And one of the things that folks are very interested in, and I'll give you all a crack at this, is simply to state your position on eminent domain. This is very controversial for property owners, landowners, and something the coalition is focused on. Representative Rodriguez, I would give you first chance to weigh in on this, just in a general sense. Where are you at on eminent domain powers as they've been used in Texas, and maybe any reforms that might need to be made?
Well, last session, I was a co-author of the bipartisan bill, House Bill 991 by Dwayne Burns. It really provided some strengths for, or provided more, I guess, power for the landowner, providing for public meetings that had to be held, restricting lowball offers, restoring condemned land to its original state. There was also, I was a sponsor, I guess, of Senate Bill 474 by Lois Colcourse, which provided that attorney's fees would be awarded for those landowners to whom the industry gives lowball offers. So, and it had a lot of legs. It seemed like it was moving, and then there was some funny business there at the end. But I'm very much in favor of property rights, and when it comes to eminent domain, if there's going to be a taking of some kind, that there's fair and open compensation. It needs to be open, and the landowner needs to be treated absolutely fairly. And so I would support that legislation again next session.
Don Zimmerman, the issue of eminent domain, just plainly, where are you at on this? Do we need certain reforms? What do you think?
Well, let me first offer a disclosure. My family trust owns some property on the San Marcos River, and it just so happens that there's a river authority right now planning condemnation against property that's in our family trust. You may have heard of a huge pipeline that's going from kind of through central Texas, and it's they're planning to condemn part of our property. So it's fascinating, but I do agree with. I'm happy to say I agree with Representative Rodriguez about providing some additional measures to protect property owners. I was also the president of a utility district, and of course I served on Austin City Council, and I know that it's a very, very unfair playing field to have a government entity that has basically almost unlimited money to hire the world's greatest lawyers to support their position and whatever they want to do, where some of these relatively small private property owners simply don't have the money to hire the legal expertise they need to defend themselves. So it's very unfair, especially to the small property owner. In our case, we have about 120 acres. And when you go to some of the attorneys who specialize in this, that's not even worth their time. They deal with huge property owners and big cases that involve tens of millions of dollars. That's what they're interested in. So I haven't looked at any particular policy adjustments, but from an ideological point of view, I agree that we definitely need reforms to protect property owners, especially the smaller ones.
Mr. Dixon, where are you at on eminent domain? The libertarian label would give me some idea. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it does. So regardless of what I say, look at my record. The keynote decision happened when I was on city council in Lago Vista, and I led the effort to reform eminent domain in Lago Vista. And that's really the test. It's not what people say, it's what people do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm going to talk about my website again. Go there and look at my record and see what I did. I'm aware of what TRED has advocated, the 3 policy initiatives regarding public meetings, minimum protections, and holding condemners accountable. I'm in favor of all that. I think those are good reforms. And I'm also aware of the Kinder Morgan pipeline issue. Fortunately, I have a very good friend named Dr. Mark Miller, who's an advisor to me, who literally wrote the book on the Railroad Commission regarding oil pipelines in eminent domain. I know ranchers that are just not getting a fair deal when somebody puts a pipeline through. So when it comes to eminent domain, I think I'm going to be your best friend. I'm the closest in alignment to the issues that TRED is concerned with.
All right, Dr. Ridgway, your thoughts on eminent domain, any reforms that need to be made, and you know, I think there are plenty of stories about what people would say are abuses when it comes to this, but there does have to be a balance with economic development too. Where are you at on this?
Well, I'm happy to say that it sounds like I'm in agreement with just about everybody who's spoken so far on this issue. I watched the bill that Representative Rodriguez mentioned, I watched with interest and to see, because I do favor, I think lowball offers and eminent domain cases are actually a very big problem, particularly in rural areas. And Senate District 14 is not just the city of Austin. It's there, you know, it's all of Bastrop County. This is a very big concern for landowners in that area, especially as it grows, as roads need to be built and water resources need to be managed and that kind of thing. I would like to see some level of the state paying legal bills for landowners that receive lowball offers, because Don's right that this is a big issue, that I don't want to say a routine occurrence, but it does occur very often. I recognize there are problems when you give a lawyer a blank check from the state, but at the same time, I do feel that this could be managed to shore up our property rights, our private property rights, and limit eminent domain cases.
All right, and I think Judge Eckhart, did I give you a chance to answer this one just yet? I got lost in my notes. There's a lot of you, luckily for me, at least one person dropped out just for this debate, but I can sort of keep it straight. But go ahead, your thoughts on eminent domain and abuses versus what economic development does need to be done, and what reforms might be able to find the right balance.
So nobody has mentioned the distinction between eminent domain exercised for a public purpose and eminent domain exercised by a private interest for a private purpose that has some public element. And that's extremely important in the issue of eminent domain. Historically, the reason we have eminent domain is that it's a grant from the sovereign to an entity to take private property with market compensation for public benefit. That's the reason for eminent domain. Mm-hmm. And in a democracy, the sovereign is us, the people. So what we have here is the state legislature has spent a considerable amount of time making sure that there is a quality process when a local governmental entity is exercising eminent domain. It's really rather strict. And Representative Rodriguez's bill is an example of one of the tightening strictures on local governmental use of eminent domain. Travis County very rarely uses eminent domain except for transportation projects. But where the state has completely abdicated building a quality process is where the state has granted carte blanche to certain industries to utilize eminent domain with hardly any process at all, even to the point of the Railroad Commission saying, hey, listen, my job here is just ministerial. I just rubber stamp stuff. So really, we've got to get to what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If the sovereign is going to grant eminent domain authority to local government and to private industry, they must be held to the same standard with regard to a quality process, public input, held accountable for abuses, and the project must have public purpose, and that public purpose needs to be proven.
Well, let me ask about one specific project that is out there that's been talked about quite a bit. You've all seen the headlines on this. Tesla talking about building one of their facilities right here in this district in the Austin area. Your thoughts on how that would impact the area? You know, obviously there are questions around growth. There are questions around, you know, how to deal with the development of a giant new employer in the area during a pandemic. I mean, there are all kinds of challenges that that emerge because of what's going on. Your thoughts, Dr. Ridgway, on the sort of opportunities and challenges that come along with something like that?
Well, obviously, if that factory gets built, it's going to be a boon in high-tech jobs for the area, especially for Austin. We already have a very good workforce and a high-tech workforce. So I think we can meet the needs that that factory will require. In addition, I would say that organizations like that tend to spawn off other businesses, especially high-tech businesses, as other needs arise to help with that factory, or other skills are acquired there that people then take into the community and use in other ways to start small businesses. So it really could be an economic boon overall. However, I do not feel that any tax advantage needs to be given to Tesla to build that factory. We have an excellent economic climate here in Texas, even during this pandemic. Our business climate, as far as I'm concerned, is second to none in the United States. We have a lot of freedom here, again, even in this pandemic, so that businesses can operate as they need to. And I feel that that should be the driving force. We've already discussed the effects of this, again, this economic downturn on the state budget coming up, and how there's going to be a need to find new sources of revenue. I really feel that giving Elon Musk a whole bunch of money right now is probably not in the best interest of the state. If he wants to build the factory here, that would be fantastic, and we would welcome the jobs. But again, I don't think that there needs to be any tax incentive to do so.
Yeah, Judge Eckhart, your thoughts on Tesla in the Austin area, and there have been questions for years from Republicans and Democrats alike about the kind of tax breaks that the state and local governments are able to offer and that they do offer. The closing, the deal closing fund that the governor uses. A lot of Republicans not happy about the way it's used. Sometimes they have questions about oversight, at least, and of course, as a legislator, you'd be in that position of oversight, you know, for those sorts of things. Your thoughts on, well, what Dr. Ridgway said about, you know, giving Elon Musk a bag of money to come Texas?
I have a long and demonstrated track record of stating repeatedly that the best incentive for companies to locate in Texas and to locate in Central Texas specifically is good infrastructure. Good transportation infrastructure to move people and services and goods, also ready workforce, and a level playing field in the courts and also in our other policies. That's the best lure for government, is that kind of certainty. That way you're not putting your thumb on the scale of a specific enterprise. You're leveling up the playing field of opportunity for everyone. So I'm not a huge fan of preferential tax treatment to specific industries. So much so that the Chamber of Commerce came to me and said, my goodness, Eckhart, what will make you vote for one of these? Because I think I've rarely voted, and it usually has to do with solar energy, and very rarely on anything else. And I said, okay, I have three criteria. One, that it has to be a climate change adaptive industry for mid-skilled jobs, because we have a big gap of mid-skilled jobs in Central Texas. We don't have much factory or industry type work here. So that hole needs to be plugged. Second, it needs to be located in an area that doesn't traditionally get a whole lot of opportunity. And third, the company has to have a commitment to hire local. So that we're not just importing labor. We're actually giving jobs to individuals in good mid-skill career trajectory. It is possible that Tesla hits those 3 marks. If it hits those 3 marks and the Travis County Commissioners Court negotiates a good deal with enforceable clawback if Tesla does not perform, I think that that would be an appropriate utilization of preferential tax treatment. But I am very skeptical of these deals. There is more than 40 decades of academic research about where preferential tax treatment works and where it doesn't. And that's the reason I was very specific with the chamber. It has to plug a hole in our continuum of economic prosperity in a place that needs that for people who need that. And if it's not that, I'm not looking at it.
All right, Mr. Zimmerman, your thoughts on incentives for companies, specifically Tesla, generally, any company that we're trying to bring to Texas during an economic downturn, as some of the other folks have said here. It's hard to say no to new jobs, but you do have to have a balance in what government does to get them here, right?
I need to say first that I started my professional career as an engineer out of Texas A&M in Buick City in Flint, Michigan, a car factory. And at that time, it was the most highly automated car factory in North America, and it was one of the most fun jobs I ever had. I love the manufacturing business and cars in particular, and I'm dead set against these subsidies for Tesla or for anyone else. If I'm elected state senator, I would work on serious amendments, if not abolishing the Texas Enterprise Fund and Chapter 380 local government code that empower these subsidies. From a policy point of view, from an ideological point of view, I don't understand how these are even legal under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. We've heard a lot about equal protection under the law. And if you think about equal protection under the law, these incentives are meant to violate the very concept, because they say the people that are here currently already paying taxes are going to be forced to pay more for the benefit of somebody who might be coming in at the invitation, mostly of unelected bureaucrats. I had a couple of these cases when I served on the Austin City Council, and I noticed how when this information was presented to us, it was always presented in a one-sided fashion by government bureaucrats who had already predetermined that they wanted these subsidies to go through. So the deals are structured in a way where it's virtually impossible for your average taxpayer to know if the terms and conditions have ever been met. You will never get a hold of that information. The companies that are being subsidized, it's questionable if anybody is really carefully auditing these deals. And I proposed in one budget cycle that we eliminate some of the Chapter 380 subsidies, in particular to Samsung, and people just threw a fit. When we proposed this, we need to get rid of these subsidies, but I just think they're a terrible idea. What we should really be doing is making taxes affordable for everyone. We should not give in to this scam with governments and bureaucracies around America competing with each other as to who can raise taxes on the existing taxpayers the most to subsidize new business. That is an unsustainable model that's just going to bankrupt everybody.
Yeah, one of the criticisms that I've heard over and over again from some Republicans and Democrats is that when taxes were overhauled to create what we now know as the franchise tax, that you haven't had one big business start in Texas since then. Because what would the incentive be to put your own money into something that you'd be taxed on, before you ever made any money, right? And so now we do this game of trying to get businesses to come from other places, right, with these different incentives and the different tax breaks and everything else. Representative Rodriguez, where are you at on this? Certainly, we're looking at programs that have been around for a while. They're controversial, and you've wrestled with it in the legislature.
Well, you mentioned the franchise tax. I'm just going to say, since the creation of the franchise tax, it's been whittled down to where it virtually brings in very little money in. That was, I thought, was meant to help fund public education, and we just keep chipping away at it. I think the problem with this issue is that every state has programs like this. That's the problem. Every single state, every has some form of tax incentive to bring businesses in. So so large companies use that to their advantage, and they play cities and states or whatever against each other to get what they want. I don't like it, but I don't think Texas should be at a competitive disadvantage. That being said, where the Tesla location is proposed to be, it's in a fairly low income area. I've represented Del Valle ISD for 18 years. These kind of jobs don't come around a whole lot for people, Hispanic, predominantly Latino, and African American young people. When I initially heard about this, I talked to the school district, I talked to Tesla, and I said, this has got to be a pipeline for those kids to get jobs once they graduate, if they don't go to college first. And I feel like if we're going to give $68 million worth of tax break, then we got to get something out of it. That the county should have a very strong agreement, written agreement, a binding agreement that has strong clawback provisions, as Sarah mentioned, and we have to hold them to it. We have to hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they're good paying jobs, that there are benefits, and that the school district and those kids are going to benefit directly, in those families in that area. There's been very little investment in that community, in Del Valle ISD, in that general area. I cannot say that I cannot be against 5,000 jobs for those people. I cannot, and I will not. So I support it. I think we need to have a really strong agreement that the county's going to come up with. I know the school district is really, they seem to really want this. They think it's going to be good for their kids and the families there. But let's also know that that's going to lead to, there's a supply chain issue there too. It'll create, hopefully, ripple effects that you'll have other jobs that can come about that are not direct there, but that 5,000 jobs actually means, 7,000, 8,000, whatever that might look like. And, let's not forget the 313 agreements, and that's a big part of why we have successful renewable energy with solar and with wind. And I've had to fight in the legislature to stop my Republican colleagues from trying to get rid of those agreements for renewable, because it doesn't create the jobs. But from my perspective, it has a bigger meaning in that we're trying to provide more renewable energy and lower emissions, and that's worth that investment too. So let's just be clear: the $68 million that the state's going to have to hold harmless for the school district. So the state's foregoing basically paying the school district to keep them held harmless. That's tough for next session. I mean, we know what the budget's going to look like. I mean, minimally, it's going to be 2011, which was $27 billion. And talking to Glenn Hager, it's going to be more than that. And so it's a tough time to do it, but I think we want to create jobs in our community, especially our low income and minority communities. And I think this is a way to do that.
Mr. Dixon, I'll give you the last word on Tesla, economic incentives, and how to strike a balance on the economic development, versus letting the free market do what it does.
Well, I'd like for Elon Musk to come to District 14, because if he did, I think I'd get another libertarian voter. I'd hope. But we have a sexy area for business. It's a lot of
One
people.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a sexy area for business. And I think a lot of people would love to have Tesla come. Just like when I was on city council, people wanted a grocery store in town. Well, a grocery store came, and when it came to a vote for a tax subsidy, I voted no. My record on corporate welfare is no. Fundamentally, two reasons. There's an ethical question. If we're going to give corporate welfare away, where's my tax abatement as a small business owner or anyone else? So there's an ethical question, but then there's a sustainability question. I understand the valuation of a property can go up when you do something on it. But show me the studies where we know how we're paying for the impact on more kids in schools, more cars on the road, more demand on water, more demand on all the public services. My policy is what I call free market sustainability. The growth needs to pay for itself. In Lago Vista, we used impact fees so that when we grew, we had a way to expand the water treatment to make sure we could serve everybody. So growth needs to pay for itself. I'm going to promote free market sustainability as a state senator.
All right, I appreciate that. There is one more question that the landowners of the coalition wanted to get in for y'all, and we certainly have time for it here before 7:30. And then we'll have one more question I'm going to ask that's cleverly designed to give you a closing statement without calling it that. Is that fair? Okay. So you mentioned water, Mr. Dixon, so I'm going to start with you on this. The question, quite simply, your position on groundwater, wastewater, what we need to do from the state level to deal with this very vital resource.
Okay, so instead of starting with my website, I'm going to start with a book.
Okay.
It's called A Thirsty Land by Seamus McGraw. And I think it's a must read for anyone who needs to address water in Texas. It's extremely complex, as you know. Of course, in our district, we got the Wilcox Carrizo Aquifer. There's the Vista Ridge project. And in Texas, you got the right to capture. So does somebody with the biggest straw just get to suck it all out? So I was the liaison from City Council to LCRA, and I have appreciation for the subject. Again, I come back to free market sustainability, where we were able to use impact fees so that when we grew, we had the funding for expanding water treatment. That's an example of using free market sustainability. But I think ultimately with water, I don't think anyone says they can just solve it like that. You're going to be one of the 31 state senators and just fix it. It's going to take somebody who can work with others. And I think out of 31 senators, if we have one libertarian in there who can try to get people together, maybe we can solve this.
Representative Rodriguez, let me go to you on this question of water, wastewater, and what the state needs to be doing. I mean, there was in the past under former Speaker Strauss, right? There was, some progress made with SWIFT funding, trying to put those infrastructure projects in place. But we also have the question of groundwater, dealing with landowners, et cetera. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's our most precious resource that we have in the state of Texas. And as we grow, and we grow every year as a state, it's going to become more and more precious. Talking about Bastrop for a second, well, just rural Texas too. I mean, I fully support the farmers' right to use surface water or groundwater as sustainably using it as they see fit for agriculture. But if you look at, again, talking about Bastrop is water rich, and you do have the situation like, where water is being piped to other parts of the state of Texas. And there's a lot of issues with water speculators, people that are just buying swaths of land and just putting the biggest straw they can in the ground. And that's all due to growth, right? And getting water from where it is to where the people are. I would look at filing legislation that would allow for the groundwater conservation districts to create a mitigation fund. That's where the money would come in from using the export fee that water conservation districts can charge for export fee, meaning that you're getting the water from this point, but you're piping it all the way to another point that's outside of the conservation district, and charging that fee and putting that fee to a mitigation fund to help those negatively impacted, those owners that have shallow wells, and the potential that they're going to have to use the money potentially to go deeper because this big water developer is importing a lot of the water. So I would look at that. As far as wastewater goes, I mean, that's obviously TCEQ. The concern there, a lot of it is runoff into streams and groundwater. There's questions about direct reuse and indirect reuse and all those kind of things. But, we, as a state senator, I would just have to really stay on TCEQ to make sure that the water quality is what it needs to be, and that they'd have to make sure that that they're doing their job, and so that the water quality is there.
Mr. Zimmerman, as a friend just texted me, somebody watching says, water is a quagmire. There's so much to unravel with it. Where are you at philosophically?
Your phone cut out there, sorry.
Well, on water. what state government should be doing specifically on the issues of water and wastewater.
Okay, got it. I concur that in its entirety, the topic is very complex, but of course, from an ideological view, either you're going to go in the direction of private property rights concerning the effective use, management, the sale of water, or you're going to have unelected bureaucracies controlling this resource. So I think it's obvious that I would move in the direction of private property rights. The Texas Public Policy Foundation put out an excellent document in 2017. It's called The Case for a Texas Water Market.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably use that as the basis for policy discussions going forward for how we solve this. The worst thing that could be done is to put unelected bureaucrats in charge of water management. I think it was Milton Friedman that said, if you were to put government bureaucrats in charge of the Sahara Desert, they would be able to create a shortage of sand. And I think the same would be true of water. If the government bureaucrats get control of our water resources, it will be an unmitigated disaster. So I'd like to see conversations along the lines of the case for a Texas water market and see how we can get some stability and some assurance and confidence policy-wise going forward so people can make wise decisions. But it's got to start with respect for a water market that respects private property rights.
All right, Judge Eckhart, I'm going to give you the last word on this one, but first, Dr. Ridgway, your thoughts on, and I'm going slow again, water, wastewater, what we should do from state government perspective.
Well, I want to agree with Don on one thing, is that I do feel that private property rights need to be respected above all here. This is a big issue right now in Bastrop County. The Vista Ridge Water Project that's already been mentioned is already removing water from the aquifer that feeds a large portion of that county. In addition, LCRA has made some claim to try and get some of that water as well. And the idea that these government or quasi-government entities should be able to use that water, whereas your average rancher should not be able to just stick a well in their ground, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I do want to mention just long-term, there needs to be some long-term planning for water needs in Texas. Texas is growing at a crazy rate, in particular in Central Texas. We all remember the droughts of 2012 and the subsequent fires in Bastrop. We all also remember more recently an episode where we had to boil our water here in Austin because there was because the local water treatment facility was overwhelmed at the time. We need to make some substantial investments in our long-term water infrastructure. And by that, I would mean our reservoirs in particular. I'd like to see ways in which those reservoirs could be deepened and potentially hold more water for those lean times when we do have droughts. And also in our water treatment facilities to ensure that we don't experience a period where Texans will be without water. There are really some long-term issues that I feel don't come up very often. It seems like there's a lot of squabbling over issues, local issues here and there, but the state needs to look at some long-term development of this resource in particular.
All right, and Judge Eckhart, your thoughts on what some have described as the ongoing, right? We're in Texas. What do we need to be doing? I know I've referenced myself into a corner. Anyway, what do we need to be doing when it comes to water planning and the issue of wastewater as well?
Water has been my world for 20 years. More than half, well, let's just say probably more than half of Senate District 14 is outside an incorporated area. And therefore, I find it curious that Councilmember Zimmerman is advocating for a water market. We have a water market. Outside of the unincorporated areas of the state of Texas, it is absolutely private water, unless you have a municipal utility district. People are on their own in terms of water, wastewater. You dig a well and you drop a septic, unless you are on a mud or you're pulling water from a CC, a certificate of convenience and necessity. So we have a private water market, and it has resulted in an incredibly unfair and lumpy distribution of our water resources in the state of Texas. Senate District 14 is half wet and half dry. It has two aquifers, the Trinity and the Carrizo-Wilcox. The Trinity is like a series of bathtubs in karst, whereas the Carrizo-Wilcox is this vast underground reservoir that runs from north to south, the entire length of the state. The people in Bastrop are very, very concerned that their reservoir, their underground reservoir, is going to get pumped dry by water profiteers that are unregulated and are operating under the rule of capture. So we need to put on our big girl panties, as they say, and have an honest discussion about the effects of the rule of capture. We cannot continue to talk about private property rights around a common pool resource that is absolutely necessary for life. This is a fallacy, a complete illusion that water is a private property right. Utterly illusory. So we need to face the rule of capture. We need to demand scientific data-driven decisions about the distribution of this precious and absolutely vital common pool resource. And we need to prevent industry. And when I say industry, I'm talking about housing developers and pipelines and any industry. We need to prevent any private industry from exporting the risk of squandering our water quality or water quantity on private individuals and the public entities that are attempting to protect that water quality and that water quantity. I have sued folks who polluted our water and succeeded in suing them. I have also pled with TCEQ for the creation of the last water conservation district. And I must strenuously disagree with Representative Rodriguez about an export fee to mitigate for wells that go dry. That creates a disincentive for groundwater conservation district to export more in order to protect those who are being harmed by that export. So we really simply must bear down on this. This requires a systemic look in order to preserve this precious common pool resource. Otherwise, we will dabble around the edges and create perverse disincentives that actually make the circumstance worse rather than better. On the Trinity Aquifer, we have a multiplicity of groundwater conservation districts. Thank goodness they work together. If they didn't, we'd be in a world of hurt. The Carrizo-Wilcox also has a multiplicity of groundwater conservation districts, which sometimes sue one another. And their disagreements are genuine because one water conservation district can have a desired future condition that allows them to pump like crazy and have a contract with Vista Ridge to pump their water down to San Antonio. It will have a deleterious impact on another groundwater conservation district like the Lost Pines GCD, and they can't stop the Savannah, the Post Oak Savannah GCD from entering into the contract. So we really have a lot of work to do in the area of water. And we must start looking at it as a common pool and very precious resource that must be protected through data-driven analysis and a fair distribution.
All right, and I think we have time for one more question here. If we're all respectful of everybody's time, we're going to wrap up at about 7:30, but we can go a little bit past that. The question is, if you are elected, Senator Dixon, Senator Ridgway, Senator Eckhart, Senator Rodriguez, Senator Zimmerman, you're the senator. You wake up, it's your first day, you're sworn in to the Texas legislature. You're heading out to the green carpet of the Texas Senate. What are you going there to tackle without going in depth on the issues? Maybe the top 2 or 3 things that you are there to address that session. And it can be some of the things that we've already talked about, or maybe things that we haven't brought up just yet. And I would start with Senator Ridgway.
I think you're getting a little premature with that title there, but
and you're a doctor, so there's always a question like, do you call him the doctor or senator? Which one is?
Jeff is fine. But, as far as priorities, my number 1 priority would be our response to the pandemic, wherever we are at that time. My number 2 priority, the other candidates have heard me mention this many, many times, is opening up our ballot process to allow more independent candidates or smaller party candidates like myself and Pat to be on ballots in the future. One of the reasons that we're here joining you today is because the special election rules are quite different than the rules for general elections in November. And once we get back in the cycle of just general election to general election, it's going to be a much higher bar for people like us to get on the ballot and be able to make our views known and to give voters a choice and help open up our politics to some new voices and some new ideas that are not beholden to party politics. Those would be my two priorities.
All right, Senator Dixon, what are you going there to do? First day in the legislature. What are you going to tackle that 140 days?
Okay, well, the first thing is I don't have a list of priorities, plans, platform. My approach has been always that I'm going to listen, deliberate, and use common sense. You can't predict what's going to happen between now and session. You didn't know COVID was going to happen, so priorities can change. You've already heard my positions, but I can tell you, obviously, budget and redistricting are the two, probably the biggest things that are going to happen. When it comes to redistricting, candidates like Jeff and I are in an unfair position. We have 6 candidates on the ballot here. That's great. That's voter empowerment. But the state of Texas has been trying to remove candidates like Jeff and I from the ballot. I want to empower voters and make sure redistricting is done in a nonpartisan way. So instead of politicians choosing the voters choose their elected representatives.
All right. Senator Zimmerman, the man behind the curtain there.
All right. Well, the first thing I would do as a new senator is look for some mentoring. And I would get that from Senator Donna Campbell and Senator Don Buckingham, both of whom have endorsed my campaign. When it comes to issues, certainly the amendments to the emergency powers that are being exercised by state and local government, that obviously is a priority along with the budget. But right behind that, I would be working with Senator Paul Betancourt, who has done a fantastic job as a fiscal conservative on property tax reform. I'd be eager to work with him.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my main things, based on 20 years of political activism and being elected to office twice, I would go after the taxpayer-funded lobbying with a vengeance. Because what's happening there is our tax money is being used to hire professional lobbyists to lobby against the interest of taxpayers and property owners. I know that to be a fact. I have numerous examples that we can't go into, but that would be my third priority.
All right. Senator Eckhart, what do you do when you get there?
First is health and economic recovery from COVID-19. We absolutely have to address the fact that even before COVID-19, we had the highest uninsured rate in the entire United States at 18%. And it's certainly much worse now because we're so over-reliant on employer-based insurance. So we're probably up around 30% uninsured. So we've got to address that right away by pulling down Medicaid and expanding it. Also, in recovering our economy from COVID-19, we absolutely have to take a look at braiding our one-time dollars in the rainy day fund along with our CARES Act dollars to prepare us, to carry us to the other side of this economically, but also prepare us for the new economy. We have not done a good job, even before COVID-19, of preparing our workforce for the new economy that is in the cloud, that is increasingly mechanized, and also that has vulnerabilities to climate change that we really do have to address. So I would suggest, and I believe that I share this with Representative Rodriguez, that we make a substantial investment in statewide broadband because that would help us in the health recovery, because it would make telemedicine available to Texans across the state, but it would also help us in the economic recovery in braiding our education, our training, and our adaptive industries so that people could train up for jobs and find the jobs of this new economy. Next, I would look at criminal justice reform as a former prosecutor and with a long history in criminal justice reform on the Commissioner's Court. I think we have a lot to do at the state level to level up the playing field, to right-size police, to get rid of our militarization and federalization of community police, and also to hold police officers accountable for perpetrating crimes that they hold us accountable for because we ask them to. And then fourth is climate resiliency, and water is going to be a big issue there. I will continue to concentrate on water resources, groundwater and surface water resources, to get a fair distribution that will not only protect this generation, but future generations. Our economy will not be served if we don't make sure that we protect our natural resources and our drinking water.
All right, Judge, thank you. And finally, in my experiment of all of us getting ahead of ourselves, Senator Rodriguez, you get there, and you'd be an incoming Senator Rodriguez when we have one going out.
Right. Besides the budget and which is going to be the biggest issue, and the equitable recovery that I think we need to be fighting for as a legislature, is universal broadband access. It's really important. The virus and this pandemic has highlighted more than anything just how important that is. I mean, we have just been jump-started into the 21st century, and we have to make that investment, either as a state or partnering with the private sector to get that thing done, and it has to be affordable. If you don't have access to the internet, affordable access to the internet, you may not be able to work from home. You won't be able to work from home, and your job might require you to do that. You won't be able to see your doctor potentially there. And as we've seen, you may not be able to educate your child. And that has serious ramifications. So that is probably my top priority outside of the budget, and how we're going to do that, deal with that equitably. And then I think the next thing would be strengthening the social safety net. Again, just kind of looking at what COVID-19, what it has exposed, is how many people truly live paycheck to paycheck. And it's not just here in SD 14, but all over the state of Texas. And we need to have our social safety net strengthened, but be it a workforce commission. Let's modernize the workforce commission so that they have the capacity in case in times of crisis like this or something similar to this. I think we look at CHIP and SNAP benefits, and there was some. I applaud the governor for some of the waivers that he had there when it came to co-pays and income checks and other things like that. Let's just waive those permanently. I think that's a good place to start. And then obviously criminal justice reform, we are ripe for some change there. And I think I've seen over my 18 years in the House, Republicans and Democrats really seeing much more eye to eye on this issue. And I think we need to talk about it more meaningfully. The governor has talked about it, has stated publicly that we need to do something about it. And I think that there's the will this coming session to do something meaningful. I would like to see legislation passed where someone who stopped for that would just be in a ticket, that they wouldn't get arrested. That's one. Obviously, I think we need to really shine a light on what's going on out there. I would support and promote a statewide database that would have every stop, every incidents of officer use of force, and to have that in the database as well as every arrest, and have that in a database with demographic information. I mean, we know, well, at least we claim to know, that majority of people that are being stopped or pulled over are victims of excessive force are people of color. Well, let's just, as a state, let's highlight that, and let's get that information out and make it public to the media and the general public so we can shine a light on that issue. And there's many other reforms that we can look at on that front. And I think that, I'll just say it, at the end of the day, it's really about the people of SD 14, who they want to send to the Senate. And, I just believe that I have the right experience to get some of these things done, and the right relationships that I've made over the years in the Senate. I've served with half of the senators in the House, and know all those folks out there. But it's not just the experience, but it is your ability to get things done, especially in this critical moment in time. It's going to be a pretty tough session coming up. Based on my years of experience, we're going to have a tough one.
Well, I think that's not in question. It is going to be a tough legislative session for the candidates. I hope this was as fair as possible. It's difficult with a lot of you. For the audience, I hope it was informative. We're so glad that you tuned in. And the internet will probably cut out again because this is the most important thing I'm going to say. The election, I'm going to say it slow. The election is on the 14th, right? Early voting going on now. If you don't early vote, go vote on election day, July 14th. We appreciate you tuning in. And I would
actually, most early voting polls close tomorrow. You may
right. So get that right.
Yeah,
get that
they're
done
not
tomorrow.
open this weekend, so
that's
you
right.
may want to let people know. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the assist, Jessica. I would turn it back over to you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Scott, thank you so much for
Scott.
moderating this evening. Thank you all for giving of your time and giving us more of your platform and why you want to be in the Texas Senate. On behalf of TRED and our 600 member strong organization, we are grateful for you sharing this information with us tonight, and we wish you all the best at the polls.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Hey, thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you for holding this.
I'll still buy you all a beer.
I'm
All
looking
right,
forward to it.
I'm
I'll
ready.
take you up on it, Pat.
You got it.
Okay, we're going to do that one of these days.
And
We're
this
going to
is
do that.
here. This is a club soda, in case anybody was wondering.
Those are good, Judge. I like those. I like the line.
I love these.
Yeah.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye, everyone.
Bye.